The front door doctrine. Stay home and survive. The rain had been falling for 3 days. Not the gentle kind that watered gardens and made the grass smell sweet. This rain was cold, relentless and grey, the kind that made the world feel like it had been abandoned. Inside the small brick house at the end of Maple Street, Walter Hensley sat at the kitchen table with a mug of black coffee and a revolver he hadn't touched in 20 years. Walter was 68 years old. His knees hurt when the weather changed. His hands trembled slightly when he tried to open jars. The doctor said his heart was strong but warned him about stress. But Walter had once jumped out of airplanes for a living. The television in the corner was silent now, its screen dark after the power grid had failed 2 nights earlier. Before it died, every channel had been shouting the same message. Evacuate! Leave the city! Bug out! Walter had listened. Then he had quietly turned the TV off. He had seen that movie before. The young man's fantasy. 2 houses down. A pickup truck had roared away in the middle of the night. Walter had watched from behind his curtains as the Miller family tried to load their lives into the bed of the truck. Camping packs, plastic bins, a generator tied down with rope. The man had looked exhausted. The woman looked terrified. Their teenage son kept checking his phone even though the towers were already down. Walter knew what they believed. They believed that somewhere out there, in the woods, on a back road, in a campsite, far away, there was safety. It was the fantasy every survival channel sold. Grab your pack, hit the road, live free in the wild. But Walter knew something most of them didn't. At 68, the woods were not your friend. Cold was your enemy. Infection was your enemy. Exhaustion was your enemy. Mobility was your enemy. Walter took a sip of coffee and looked around his kitchen. This house had walls, it had insulation, it had supplies, and most importantly, it had a front door that locked. The mobility trap. 3 decades ago, Walter had trained young soldiers in something called situational survival. The first rule had always been simple. Movement creates risk. Out in the open, you are visible. Visible means vulnerable. A young soldier might survive that gamble. A man with arthritis and blood pressure medication? Not a chance. Walter had done the math in his head the moment the crisis began. The highways would choke, gas would disappear, people would panic. And somewhere along those crowded roads would be the moment when the strong preyed on the weak. Walter wasn't planning to be on that road. The fortress mindset. He finished his coffee and stood slowly. Pain stabbed his knee. He ignored it. Step 1 had already been completed. Preparation. His basement shelves held 3 months of canned food. Rice, beans, soup, water filters, battery radios. The result of a quiet habit he'd built after retirement, buying a little extra each week. Nothing flashy, nothing tactical, just insurance. Walter walked to the hallway and checked the deadbolt again. Click. Solid. The windows had already been reinforced with interior braces. The back door had a bar across it. The house wasn't a bunker, but it didn't need to be. It only needed to be harder to take than the house next door. The grey man. At noon, there was a knock. Walter froze. Slowly, he walked to the front window and moved the curtain just enough to see Mrs. Alvarez stood on the porch, 73, widowed. Walter had shoveled her driveway for years. He opened the door halfway. "You staying?" she asked quietly. Walter nodded. She held up a small box. "Blood pressure meds," she said. My sister mailed extras last month. Walter opened his palm. Inside the box were 3 sealed bottles. He smiled slightly. I have insulin, he said. For a moment, neither of them spoke. No grand speeches, no declarations, just an understanding. Neighbors, allies, the kind you trusted because you had watched them live their lives quietly for decades. Not because they posted about survival online. Medical logistics. Walter returned to the kitchen and opened a metal container. Inside were labeled pill bottles, blood pressure, antibiotics, pain relief, 2 inhalers he hoped he'd never need. In his old unit, they had called medicine the clock of survival. Food bought time, water bought time, but medication decided whether the clock stopped entirely. Walter had made sure his clock could run at least 90 days, long enough for the chaos to burn itself out. The psychology of holding ground. Outside, somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. Walter didn't flinch. Fear was natural. Panic was fatal. The hardest part of survival wasn't physical. It was mental. The moment when every voice screamed at you to run, to abandon everything familiar, to chase the illusion that somewhere else must be safer. Walter had learned something in the airborne years. Sometimes the strongest position in a fight wasn't moving forward. It was holding ground. Trigger points. Still, Walter wasn't stubborn. He had rules, 3 of them. If fire consumed the neighborhood, if armed groups began clearing houses, or if Mrs. Alvarez's health collapsed beyond what they could treat, those were the triggers. Only then would he leave. And even then, it wouldn't be panic. It would be deliberate, quiet, night travel, light gear, short distances. Because survival wasn't about heroics. It was about probability. The front door. That evening, the rain finally stopped. Walter stepped onto his porch and looked down the empty street. No traffic, no lights, just the quiet hum of a world holding its breath. He closed the door behind him and locked it. Not out of fear, out of understanding. For some men, survival meant running into the wilderness with 80 pounds on their back. But Walter Hensley knew a different truth. At 68 years old, his greatest survival tool wasn't a backpack. It was the front door he had chosen not to leave. And behind it, preparation, allies, discipline, and the quiet resolve of a man who had already survived harder things than this.